We're going to be talking about SPLA audit survival, how to survive a SPLA audit. Services provider license agreement audit. They think that is very narrow niche. There are only a handful of providers compared to the number of other companies in the world. And I'm, by the way, quite glad to see the number of people that registered for this event. So it seems like there's actually genuine interest in it. And, I didn't expect the number of people that is right now watching this to show up. So thank you for coming. And, well, what I'm sharing here is so some people ask sometimes a question like, why would I even listen to you? Who are you, Alex? What do you know? So, who am I? Just a quick introduction, not to waste too much time. So my name is Alexander Golev, and I'm a CEO of a company called Itamin LLC, which was formed, well, just a month ago. But before that, from 2003, I had a company which was a boutique consultancy based in Moscow, Russia. Then we had a branch in Europe. We had some business all around the world, consulting companies on software asset management. In 2013, I came to the UK, and in 2014, I went to work for a British company. I closed my business in Moscow, went to work for a British company called Derive Logic. It was a very good company. It's gone now. It doesn't exist anymore. And SPLA practice in Derive Logic was basically built by yours truly. So at some point, the customer came to us and said, can you please help us with SPLA? So we had a very, very steep learning curve with me and my colleague Dan Barron at the time. We did it together. In a couple of days, we learned all the basics of SPLA audits, and we jumped into that, baptized with fire. But since then, I've been in audits with where the initial audit bill was £300 million and higher. I've been in audits that lasted 4 years, of which 2 years I was there with the customer. So all kinds of crazy, if you can imagine. And nowadays I'm independent, not partnering with anyone. Just basically, your agenda is my agenda. This is what I'm doing. Consulting companies, including service providers, on how to avoid paying too much to fat cats like Microsoft and other vendors, but Microsoft is my specialty. So specialty is something from the food sector, isn't it? So moving on. So why the topic of SPLA audits? Why do we need to talk about them somehow differently to all the other audits? Because in many regards, what I'm going to be talking about, the timeline of the audit. How do you go through the timeline of the audit? You can take that knowledge and apply it to any other audit. But SPLA has its own quirks, probably. I think is that the word? SPLA has its own peculiarity. Anyway, quirks. Let's agree on quirks. Look at this SPLA ELP mockup, and I can try and make it full screen, actually. Why not? So, if you notice here, there are months on this spreadsheet. There are months here. Okay, just to have a little me in the corner. So, SPLA audit report is essentially not one ELP. As on a normal audit, you will get in ELP your current licensing position. And because SPLA is a pay-as-you-go, pay-as-you-consume contract, you have to report on a monthly basis to Microsoft. So if you have, say, a 5-year-long audit scope, what you will be presented is with effectively 60 effective licensing positions for each month. So whatever happened in the past, in the normal audit, you may hide it. You may say, oh, it's going to be decommissioned, and it's not going to work in SPLA. So this is a huge thing you need to understand. This is a big difference. Many things that you can be excused for in a regular audit, they just don't apply to SPLA because you have to be squeaky clean. Absolutely. If something historical is still there hanging in your data, that's gonna get counted. I'm not saying you're gonna get punished. It's gonna get counted by auditors. Everything and anything. So that is a big thing. The other unique feature, which is not on this slide, is that SPLA scope is not a regular audit scope. What is a regular audit scope? Say Microsoft. Let's not talk about Oracle or Micro Focus. Microsoft. Microsoft is usually company-wide. So when you do an audit, when somebody performs an audit of your company or your enterprise with all the affiliates, all the subsidiaries, what they look at is your entire estate, and more or less scope there is defined. More or less, you can understand this is. I'm saying more or less because it's not that simple. The bigger your enterprise is, sometimes you need to actually clarify what the scope is. I mean, the technical scope, the data gathering scope. Where do you need to get the data? Do you need it from that sub, or is it in scope of the enterprise agreement? In SPLA, you must be absolutely sure where your SPLA ends, especially when you mix things up. We'll get to that in one of the last slides. Mixing up things is a big no-no. So this is the thing. It's a monthly ELP type of report. Many ELPs. And whatever is there in your data, if you don't have the data for that month, that's going to be extrapolated from the data that you managed to collect. So it's extremely important, if you want to get prepared for an audit, you're going to start preparing today, collect snapshots of data, start today. Save everything, all the bases, all the reports, whatever you submit, everything, all the audit trail. And for how long? Well, the longest I've seen it was 7 years. So it's not like, we're only going to keep it for 3 years or 5 years. There's expiration. There's no expiration. Microsoft can do whatever they want. There's no limit on how long the audit may be. Therefore, start saving all your data, start saving all the snapshots, start taking care of your data today after this live. Don't go away yet. Moving on. And this leads me to an interesting thing here. The other concept you need to understand is, because you have these monthly snapshots and because extrapolation may happen, and you have to by the book of by the book of the law, no, by the language of the SPLA agreement, you have to prove to Microsoft that if something was deployed after you commence the service to an end customer, if you have to prove it. If something was brought into your data center by the customer 2 years after you commenced providing services to them, have a record, have a change record. So look at this slide. This is so the default calculation here was, and this is a mock-up, but this is a good example. It's based on a live example where the numbers were like 100 times more, 24,000. So the initial calculation was that you would be responsible to Microsoft for 239 subscriber access licenses for SharePoint in that picture. After all the other evidence was provided to the auditor, the final figure became 28. What is it? 1/9 of the initial figure, almost 90% of savings, or 80 something. So this is something that you must understand, that you have lots of cutoff points. The data that you must prepare and expect an audit anytime. Microsoft SPLA providers right now are probably the only kind of customers that is still audited by Microsoft. Why? Because Microsoft wants everybody, all the providers, to lift their workloads and shift them to Azure. You can still be a CSP partner, dear provider. Yes, you won't lose your margins. You won't lose your customers. Who controls the relationship in that case? Big question. They've just opened. Don't misunderstand Microsoft. They're a sales company. They've just opened an Azure presence in the southern hemisphere, Australia, New Zealand, and suddenly all the New Zealand providers and Australian providers have received audit letters. What a coincidence! So these are the things. I hope you understand them, and I'll get back to them. I'll get back to them On the last slides, well, we'll have questions that the community asked before this presentation, before this stream. And if somebody asks questions in the chat, I'm going to be answering them as well. So as you may notice on the next slide, I'm waiting for it to appear. The SPLA audit timeline is basically very much like, you don't have to read all these steps. We're going to go through each and every step, but it's going to be very much like, any other audit. So what is important here is we're going to be talking about the things that are unique to SPLA, where you need to pay attention in SPLA, because even if you've been baptized with fire with a normal audit, again, SPLA audit is different. It has, although the timeline is almost the same, there are certain things, certain quirks, certain properties of a SPLA audit which are different. And well, it all starts with an audit letter, doesn't it? So what an audit letter has, what does it have? It basically tells you, we're going to come to you. Microsoft will come. I mean, I'm not Microsoft, sorry. Microsoft says to you, we're going to come to your premises. We're going to send you an independent auditor according to the paragraph 13 of SPLA, that outlines very clearly all the audit conditions. So if you are a provider, you have a SPLA agreement, somewhere lost, you've lost it already because, everybody does it. Find it, scroll to the paragraph 13 in that PDF and read it today. That's another assignment for you for today. So don't panic. It's just an audit. There's no reason to panic. There's no reason to, Microsoft may sneakily sneak in some certain, kind of milestones and try and put some pressure on you, how quickly you need to do the audit. You only need to comply with what's in SPLA. I'm purposely not telling you what, because I want you to find that and read it yourself. It's very important that you get familiar with the language of SPLA. So read it, as I say in the second point of this slide, read it. And then the next thing you need to understand before you even respond to Microsoft is understand the scope. And scope, right now, when I'm talking about scope, I'm talking about two things. Which are, is this better? No, I think this is better. Two things. Scope that Microsoft told you, the calendar scope. Then, because they're going to tell you for how many years that's going to be, and that's probably going to be stipulated. Can you push back on that? That was one of the questions from Helmut today. Can you push back on the depth of the audit? You can try and negotiate it. So I never had this necessity, so I can't tell you if you're going to succeed or not. I know one thing I haven't succeeded even once on. So Microsoft usually lists all the SPLA agreements. And previously what they did is they would list all the SPLA agreements, and there was no other caveat. So customers thought you could go back and say to Microsoft, fine, is it only just related to these SPLA agreements? So what LCC did, at least the Irish LCCs, they would turn around and say, no, actually, you know what, we're going to extend the scope because we just found a few more agreements, and there's nothing you can do about it. So don't get very excited when you see, they've only listed half of your SPLA agreements. I've never succeeded limiting the audit to that time frame. Maybe to that agreement frame. Maybe someone did. If you did, let me know. I'd gladly speak to you just because to understand how to help other customers, because that's what I do. I help customers go through these audits and pay as low, as little money as they can, as possible. There's a question from Helmut. What to do when Microsoft wants to have more than 33 months in scope? So as far as I know, in the contracts that I have read myself, the scope is not limited to 36 months. Microsoft used to change SPLA language from a year to a year. So maybe at some point, I haven't seen, maybe there was an interim agreement, or maybe right now they issue agreements like that, where the scope is limited to 36 months. It's not. So how do you argue? I don't know. You can probably ask for forgiveness, or you can just say, no, guys, it's too deep, because we had an acquisition, we did something else. So, well, can't tell you. I don't think there's an answer to this question, unfortunately. So it is what it is. But then when I say understand the scope, what you need, and I'm going to go back to this again. So you need then to sit down internally. You got this letter, breathe out. There's no push yet. For a pretty long time, you can actually hold it, and you can make it as long as you want. I've seen it, as I said, lasting for 4 years. You don't want to pay auditors fees for the 4 years, though, if you found non-compliant. But then if you want to kind of prolong this period, do it. You only need to comply with what's stipulated by the SPLA contract. Simple as that. So you take control of the timeline. Again, going back to the scope, I need to finish that thought. Sit down with your teams and draw a diagram of your SPLA business. What I find is very few providers have a good detailed diagram of their SPLA business. And where you need to pay attention to is what sort of services you're providing. Is it just hosting? Is it a call center? Is it full business process outsourcing? Because I've dealt with providers that provide all kinds of services. To say some of the services that they provide are full business process outsourcing services, and they by mistake included that in the scope that they gave to the auditors. Then we'll get to that. I'll tell you. I'll continue this story, by the way, throughout the following slides. So you need to understand very clearly where SPLA ends. And if you do not understand this is the point you call me or your other trusted partner, independent, and ask them, can you help us, please? And probably this is one of those points where you can actually call your reseller if you want to do it for free. I mean, if they're happy to do it for free, and you can consult with them what's SPLA scope, what's not. What I find is not, at least with the resellers that I dealt with, they're a bit wonky on, understanding of where the SPLA scope ends. You'd rather talk to someone who's done this before. So you sat down, you understand the scope, you kind of try to push back on the timeline. Why not try it? There's no guarantee. You can try it. You did that. Fantastic. And by the way, let me just do a shameless plug here. Please follow SAMexpert on LinkedIn if you're on LinkedIn. I'll leave it on the screen. I will continue. And you know what? One thing in addition, I would be immensely grateful to you if you haven't yet subscribed to this channel on YouTube. You may be watching on Facebook and Twitch. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, please subscribe, because this is the kind of information I publish here. I think you'll find it valuable. Subscribe, click that notification bell, so you get notified, because every week there's either 1 or 2 videos from me with stuff like this, morning lives, sometimes pre-recorded videos. So I'd be really grateful if you subscribe to this channel and help us get to 1,000 subscribers ASAP. Going back to the topic, to the subject of today's live. NDA, typical step. Nothing unusual. This is similar to all the other audits. There's nothing specific to SPLA, unless I don't know something, but there's nothing specific to SPLA. It's just your normal due diligence, your normal legal due diligence during, in the beginning of any audit. Try and kind of tighten it down so you don't release too much. Auditors do not send data to Microsoft. So the process usually works this way. So don't get worried, by the way, too much about it. So auditors will not share data with Microsoft. Auditors only share data with, only the final ELP, the results of the calculation. And that is why, and I'm going to get back to this thing again in the end of this presentation, that is why it's very important that you solve all the technical questions with the auditors. All the things you can push back on interpretation of licensing rules. And auditors sometimes interpret them a bit funky. You have to try and get that done and closed during the auditor's presence on your premises, not when you go into Microsoft's negotiations. So Microsoft does not receive raw data, but I would, just in case, stipulated in the NDA, in writing. You don't want Microsoft to see your data, do you? I don't know, probably not. Does Microsoft want to see your data? That's a big question. Then you're going to have a kickoff meeting with the auditor. That's a normal process. All the big four companies that audit right now, big five, big four, I think. They will have some sort of a kickoff meeting. So they've done this for many, many years. They do it really professionally. So I've seen presentations from kickoff meetings. Obviously, they're not supposed to be shared, but, shadow negotiator, hello. Ask every question you may have. Do not leave questions unanswered. Any concerns, write them down, get answers to them. Any concerns you have, continue asking. That's what the kickoff meeting is for. They are themselves interested in you understanding the process. They want it to go as smoothly as possible and get their commission from Microsoft. This is what they want. And what also they do is auditors, although they represent Microsoft, they are not necessarily evil. Still, they have the targets. Still, they may be measured by how much money they recover from you from the provider. But they are not like 100% evil people. It's not like that. So, somebody may have some certain constraints. Somebody may have some certain obligations to Microsoft. But what they will tell you is the more professional they are, the more high profile your company is, the more you'll get that almost like advice how to save. Listen to that. What they tell you is very important. Obviously, don't take it for granted. Take it with a pinch of salt and talk to your trusted advisor, to someone who knows, who've been through this, just in case to clarify that, what they're saying is not balderdash. That is something reasonable. But usually what I find is, what I just told you about the business process outsourcing. Some auditors in the kickoff meeting, they explain that concept to the provider, and they give you a chance to not oversubmit. They give you that chance. Listen, clarify the scope again with them. Again, clarify the scope. Probably set it in writing, with the auditors. Why not? Because audit letter from Microsoft, just a notice. What you're going to be auditing, how that's going to go, who's going to have security permissions, where they will access, where will they have access to. But very importantly, at this kickoff meeting, don't give them anything, like nothing. Don't tell, don't submit. You may just explain them the overall nature of the business of the company. But I think the best advice here is to listen, to kind of like a sponge, to take it all in, write it all down, write your concerns, and then sit down yourselves, do the homework with your trusted advisor. Right. Let me remove this annoying subscribe to SAMexpert, and we'll move on to the next stage, because I must be conscious of time. This could easily slip into 2 hours if I talk too much. Data gathering. So unless you have a tool that Microsoft and the auditors trust, and you can push back, you can say we have a tool and it covers everything. You will be asked to run the scripts that auditors provide you. So please be aware, if your tool's coverage is crap, if it doesn't cover everything, or is it only kind of only scans operating systems and SQL servers, we're only responsible for operating systems and SQL servers. I'll get to that in the end of this presentation. You will be asked to run the scripts, because what they will ask you to give to gather is you will never get to 100%, but they will want you to give them 100% of the whole hosted estate, even what's inside your customers' virtual machines, their videos, their offices, their other Microsoft pieces of software. Everything must be by the language of the SPLA provided to an independent auditor. You put your signature under it. You were given that. I will provide all the data, and you said fine. You have to. That's it. You run the provided scripts. Remember, declarations are not accepted. So if scripts don't return something, you will have to find a way to technically take snapshots, take screenshots, do something, but fill all the gaps. And I advise to fill all the gaps right now, because they will come back and ask to fill the gaps, because they'll make assumptions. When you work with someone like me, with an independent advisor, we'll look at that data and we'll tell you, let's fill the gaps, because that's just better. We don't need to give them ideas. What happens if they get ideas? Audit data, when there are gaps, is always seen from the worst case scenario. If there's a missing edition of a SQL Server, auditors will most certainly assume that SQL Server Enterprise. That is changing, by the way. But then again, they'll probably assume that 20% of that is SQL Server Enterprise and 80% of that is SQL Server Standard. Still, maybe all of these instances are SQL Server Express, which is free. Sorry for going into licensing details, but what I'm saying is they will assume it's the most expensive, not the free one. Don't give them ideas. They'll attach to that number. They're like 20 million on SQL Server. They'll attach to it. And then you start catching off, and you will have to say, "Oh, please excuse me, dear auditor. We didn't collect the data by mistake." Right. So do not overshare as well. This is related to what I said about the scope. Know your SPLA services scope. Do not give them something in that data that is not SPLA. And some of the customers I had to help to go through an audit and to cut the costs of the bill, the final bill, made that mistake. They would scan another couple of clusters, and then it appears that cluster is a dedicated cluster, which is not even in SPLA scope, which is just like a collocation or something like that. But the problem is you've already submitted it. And strictly speaking, if something is in your data center, you are responsible unless you have a letter from the customer telling otherwise. So if you know that is dedicated, if you know that is not a SPLA-based hosting, there are no SPLA licenses at all, just do not give it to them. Careful. Next step. So you've gathered the data from the tool, from the scripts, and I just remind you, you may have a tool, but make sure that tool collects everything. It's a specialized SPLA tool. What else you need to provide? What you'll be asked for. And by the way, that list will be given to you in the kickoff meeting. Why I want you to understand that list now is I would like you to get prepared. I would like you to be prepared before you even receive the audit letter. So what you need to gather, because, being ready is much better compared to having to deal with the consequences. Customer contracts. What is the nature of the service? You won't have to provide the whole contract, but at least, the snapshots from the contract that outline what the service is, how it's provided, who has access, when it was what was signed. Remember about those dates. When it was signed, sometimes you may sign it in April and then stipulate in the contract that everything will be migrated to your data center by May. So you need that date, because otherwise you'll count it back to, February, January, whatever other month you signed the contract in. So you need that service commencement date, very clearly stipulated. Any addendums, any change records, anything indicating when that server was put into production, when the certain groups were created, if you manage those groups. And by the way, if you're providing SPLA services, you actually are. I have no idea how Amazon circumvents that. You are supposed to manage the service, the assets for the customer. So hosting a black box in a SPLA environment is not strictly speaking in agreement with the SPLA terms. License verification forms. So if you are an authorized license mobility partner, what I see, this is my experience, is the coverage for license mobility forms for the licenses that customers bring in from their license entitlement into your data centers. I would put my finger in the air and say, in your estate, it's probably 20%. It may be more, but that's the average across the industry. So make sure you pull your act together. You go back to your customers, and if they deploy their own licenses into your estate, ask them. It's an outline procedure. Ask them to submit those license verification forms to Microsoft, and then Microsoft will share them with you when they submit those forms. And then the licenses are attached to you for 90 days and whatnot. So these things you will have to provide to the auditor. If these verification forms will be missing, you're going to have a gap on your ELP. You're going to have a shortfall, because those licenses will be counted towards your responsibility, your shortfalls, and then you will have to commercially negotiate it with Microsoft. Do you want to do that? It's a simple operational measure. Just go to your customers, collect the forms. Your reporting history, I can't understate this. So find all the reports you submitted to your reseller, because that's how you report. You don't report to Microsoft, you report it to your reseller, Arrow, whatever there are the big resellers. Find that, because what the auditors will use for their comparison is an extract from the Microsoft's internal database of SPLA reporting. I've seen it. It's unreadable. I've seen auditors honestly crying, like, Alex, I can't understand this. Because it's just, and the quality of the data is horrendous. Because again, one of my examples, one of my customers I dealt with, so they didn't have their own reporting history. Then they found that, but the auditor was already dealing with the extract from the Microsoft databases. We compared those sets of records from their internal procurement with what Microsoft gave back. Can you guess what was the percentage of matching records? Was it like 80%, 90, 70? Here we go. 15%. How, excuse my Russian, how the hell did it happen? I've no idea. But that's it. So that's the quality of data that the customer received from Microsoft. Ask your reseller if you've lost those reports. Ask your reseller to look in their records, because they might still have them. Some of them lose them. Some of them keep them. That's your secondary source. Find your own reporting records, because they may not match what Microsoft have in their internal database. The reasons may be various, but you're only responsible for this first line, you to reseller. Then it's reseller's responsibility. If they cocked up, you understand what I mean. So, next step. You've gathered it, you submit it. So what I always insist upon is, even if you have already started the audit, you haven't yet engaged with an independent advisor, you think, yeah, we can do it all ourselves. And then suddenly during data gathering, you come to realization, we'd like somebody to review it. Do not submit anything until you've had that first review. Because then it's going to be late. Some things will be already, the cat will be out of the bag. So do not overshare, even if you're not dealing with an independent advisor. Do not overshare, as I said already. And if you can find an independent advisor, basically that's the best advice you can get, because, as I said, SPLA is tricky, SPLA is difficult. And then it's a waiting game. You can get anxious, and bite your fingers, or you can just relax if you think everything is fine. Just wait until they produce an LP. They'll probably give you a time frame, a couple of weeks, 4 weeks, depending on what your size of your estate. I've seen auditors going to their premises and doing analysis for a couple of months on estates with, say, 50,000 servers and 200,000 user records. Could easily happen. So nothing really special about it. And then you get that first ELP. That first ELP, that is essentially a set of monthly multiple ELPs. This is what you get. There will be assumptions, because you will still have gaps there in that data. Whatever you do, there'll be some gaps. It's very difficult to get 100 to 100%. There'll be assumptions. Professional auditors, the big four, they usually outline all the assumptions on the top of every page in the ELP. ELP will be what it's going to be. It's going to be an Excel file with multiple tabs, maybe multiple files. If your estate is very big, it'll be multiple files, maybe split by parts of your estate. Like government, commercial, UK, United States, New Zealand. You get the idea. There will be errors. They always make errors. It's silly, but they always do. Because in many cases, this nitty-gritty work with the spreadsheet is delegated to junior data analysts, and they make horrendous mistakes, sometimes very silly mistakes. Auditors are fine. If you point them at a mistake, they will fix it because they know it's a mistake. Nobody's going to push back and say, no, it wasn't a mistake. We didn't make it. That's fine. They know that too. But if you don't find it, they won't find it either. They might not. So do you want to take chances? I usually don't. So assumptions, errors, misinterpretations of your data easily, especially around SQL Server licensing or something very, very complex, can happen. Omissions, forgot something. Look for that. So this is what we do. This is what we always do. The first LP or any second LP, third LP, fifth version of the LP arrives, we recheck that. And the silly thing here is that sometimes errors reappear. So there was an error in version 1. It was fixed in version 2, and then for some reason it reappeared in version 3. So you need to again recheck every next version of the LP. Perform a very meticulous analysis, almost every single line. At least that is what my team used to do. That's what my team does now. And then, because we have gaps, what then happens usually? This is the usual scenario. So in general, I just say auditors may insist on to come on site. They do insist to come on site when there are gaps, and what they do, they will sit down with you. Firstly, they do some sampling always. So sort of even if there are no gaps, they will sit down with your technical people on site, or right now maybe because it's we're still in the COVID pandemic, they will probably have a Zoom call with you or a Teams call, and they will ask your tickets to log into certain servers to verify that the reported data is correct, especially if you submitted screenshots. So just to verify that you're telling the truth. They do this. It's not like they're calling you liars. It's just part of the process. Expect logging on to every server where the data is not complete. So if there's a server from which the data came only partial data came from, excuse my Russian again, then they will ask you to log into its graphical user interface or to a PowerShell console, run certain commands, or show them that what is the edition of SQL Server, what is the configuration of another piece of software. Go to your Dynamics 365 admin console, go to your Azure DevOps Server admin console to look at the projects there, just to extract additional data. Declarations, this is not a declaration exercise, this is going to be a data gathering exercise. Some of that is very challenging to collect, even with the best tools. So I would expect this to happen even if you have the best and the bestest of the tools. Then again, check it. Check everything before you submit it with an independent advisor. Unless it's already going on there on site, you have really nothing to do because the auditors will see it with their own eyes. They'll take all the notes, they'll go back home, and they will then refresh the LP. What data may be also collected at this secondary stage? It could be still collected, at the initial stage, but usually this shifts to the second stage. Server maintenance logs. So say something, there's something in the data that suggests, and somebody said that for a certain period, certain hosts in a certain VMware farm were switched off or were in maintenance mode. You don't have to pay for those months when nothing is running on those hosts. You don't have to pay for those hosts. So you have to prove it. You have to provide evidence, not a declaration. Oh, sorry, in March they were off. Nobody cares. You have to give them evidence, logs, something, change records, snapshots from that time. So you do anything in your estate, start doing it today. Again, this is number 3 for you to look at today. Start collecting all the change records. Anything you do, any change in your SPLA estate. Responsibility confirmations from customers. So if you claim, if you made that mistake and you submitted something to the auditors that shouldn't have been submitted, say this is like the extreme case. A dedicated, even like small data center, with multiple racks and lots of blades, but it's just completely dedicated to a customer. I would try and get it out of scope straight away, because if we know that the customer uses their own licenses to cover this and they have full rights to do so, because it is treated as their own hardware when they rent it, it's dedicated to them, they may use their volume licenses. If you submitted it What I've seen happening is auditors turning around and saying, you know what? I understand your logic, but by default, and they are right. So don't take me wrong. They're completely right when they ask this. By default, you are responsible for every single piece of software that is in your estate. That's it. And if you want something to be excluded, what they ask for is so you then go back to that customer and ask that customer to write an email to you or some sort of official letter explaining, confirming that they take responsibility for the licenses in that part of your estate. This is something you please expect you're going to be asked. This is number 4 as your home assignment. Start collecting them today. Moving on to the next slide. And then you get the next version. And all the same things apply here as well. All the same things. This version, final version, as I said, errors will reappear. They may reappear, but I see them reappearing the more versions you get. Sometimes errors are introduced in the next versions. Sometimes something, just recently, an auditor copied and pasted data from one tab to another tab, didn't change a few tweaks, and then suddenly a customer was due additional 300,000 British pounds sterling to Microsoft, which wasn't on the previous LP. If we didn't analyze the formulas, the customer was absolutely baffled, and the auditor just said, we just recalculated everything. They made an error. They made an error in one of the latest versions of the LP. Check it again. And then get the final one. So with the final one, this is your last chance. This is you'll be asked by Microsoft to kind of let the auditor go. Let Deloitte, KPMG, PwC, EY, let them go. Their mission is completed. What you must do before you let them go is to solve as many gray areas, as many, issues where you think you can push back. And if you have support from an independent advisor, they'll tell you where to push back. If you can push back somewhere, push back now. Because, as I said, the data is not going to Microsoft. What Irish LCC does then, they then tell you when you go into negotiations, like, re-engage with the auditors. We're not going to look at your data. We're not going to look at your emails. We're not going to look at your letters. It was auditors' part. We're only here to discuss how you're going to pay us or resolve it differently. This is what they're for. So make sure you resolve everything before you sign the final LP, and do not agree. What your signature, your approval, in a way when it says, we accept that the auditor completed their part, but we do not agree with the results. Something along these lines. I'm not a lawyer, so ask your legal person to word it for you. So you sort of let the auditors go. There's nothing else that can be done at this stage, but you still disagree with the results. Don't agree. Even if you agree, don't. Leave yourself room for negotiation. Microsoft would like it. I can tell you. I can promise you that, but do that. And then that's what happens. So we're getting closer to the end of the presentation. And the reason I basically say, I've had customers, with a very cowboy attitude. You know what? No, we're not going to collect all this data. Fine. Let them just make assumptions. Because everybody's a reasonable person. We'll just go to the negotiation table and we'll start negotiating. Do you want to go to the negotiation table when you have a shortfall of 60 million or 30 or even 50K? Because one of the extreme cases with audit defense, which was but that was a good collaboration between our team and the provider, is we started with 28 million perceived shortfalls. And in the end, the penalties were 50K. I'm not even sure they paid it to Microsoft. That may happen as well. You want to get to that negotiation table with the lowest number possible. And Microsoft won't like it. They will know that you're trying to cut this off. They will know that you're trying to, and they will start throwing ideas into your head. Like, no, you forget about that. Let the auditors go. We'll discuss it because it's easier for them. It's much easier for them to start talking to you when there's a perceived shortfall of £100 million versus £1 million. Is it not? Even if you know that 99 is complete flop. So let's talk. What leads to bad audit outcomes. The top SPLA management mistakes. And I've chosen 6. I just used the template from my previous presentation. There were 6 parts, and I thought, you know what? This is a good slide. I can reuse it. I can reuse it for just outlining, enumerating the top 6 SPLA management mistakes that lead to bad audit results. Misunderstanding of technical and contractual responsibility. I keep repeating that. Don't tell me, don't tell the auditor, oh, we're only responsible for the operating system, if that's not in your contract with end customers. Because there are certain things you must do to indemnify you from your customers wrongly installing something on the service. Anything that's in your estate. Every single thing, even if you do not support it, even if that's not in your support contract, you are accountable, you're responsible for every single thing in your estate. They deployed Visio on their server, and they enabled remote desktop connection. You are responsible to Microsoft for Visio subscriber licenses and RDS subscriber licenses. And don't tell me, no, Alex, no, I see people are dropping off because, Alex, you're telling bullshit. No, I'm not. I know what I'm talking about, because 80% of the shortfalls on average are related to SALs, subscriber access licenses. You are responsible for it. So pull your act together. There are ways to indemnify yourselves from that. So we'll get to that. So the second thing is not knowing your SPLA scope, over submitting. So this is an example. A company, a provider, provides hosting services, provides kind of semi-hosting services. They provide some, development of applications for end customers, and they also outsource. Say a provider outsources full service of an insurance company. Essentially, all the insurance company's employees providing communication with end customers and doing some nitty-gritty field work. They are the provider's people. In that case, provider can segregate that, put it in a separate box, and use their own licenses, because there's no customer access. End customer doesn't get access to Microsoft software. It's not a SPLA service. Understand that. Understand where your SPLA scope ends. Understand where the dedicated servers are, where the shared resources are. Immensely important. Then the third thing is, what I said about indemnifying yourselves from stuff, rogue customers deploying some random software on the service. It's disregarding the contractual conditions of SPLA. It's all there. It's in SPLA. And one of the things is, if you are, for instance, this is an example. If you're allowing your end customers, and if you're an authorized license mobility partner, if you're allowing your end customers to bring their own licenses into your premises, you have to either put a public offer, like Amazon did, on your website, on AWS. So everybody can, and then you can point them to read that in their contract. Or you can use the template that Microsoft helpfully provided you with your SPLA and add it as an addendum to all the end customer contracts. Do that, because that indemnifies you. Then you fall into that area when Microsoft said, if Microsoft believes that an end customer is non-compliant, you are responsible as the provider with good faith to help Microsoft rectify that. They don't say you have to pay for it, but only when you're fully in compliance, when you are fully in compliance with the terms of SPLA, when all those little conditions, all that small print is completely followed, by the letter. Don't do that. Don't disregard it. Reread your SPLA today. I told you that's your first assignment for tonight. Find your SPLA agreements and read them. It's not a long document. It's one of the shortest Microsoft agreements. It's very easy to read. And actually, it's written in a pretty human language, I must say. Then fourth thing is forgetting that SPLA licensing rules are different. The formulas are different. Licensing rules are different. SALs are not cows. The principle is different. The minimums, the core minimums for service is different. So check that. By the way, if you want me to do a live on this topic, please subscribe to this channel and please follow me on LinkedIn. Sorry, I'll put my LinkedIn link here in the end. And you know what? I'll type it in the chat as well. So please bear with me for a few seconds. HTTPS linkedin.com. So you could click it. /Golev. So let's talk about it. If you want me to do live, just basically explaining the differences between the traditional on-premises licensing and SPLA licensing, I can do that. So in a month's time from now. Moving on. Actually, on the same slide. Mixing internal and SPLA usage. Big no-no. Big no-no. If you put anything on the shared infrastructure for your internal use, that becomes SPLA scope. Because look, check your product terms, Microsoft product terms. What they say is you may only use these licenses on a piece of hardware that is dedicated to your own use. If it's not dedicated to your own use, if you allow other people to host something or you host it for them, that's not your internal own use. And in that case, that software will be counted towards your SPLA shortfall. With all the consequences that you may not use your own licenses. Arguably, you could apply license mobility there because then you're kind of providing hosting services to yourself. It's a headache. Segregate. This is point number 5. As for your homework, segregate. Start today, tomorrow. Internal use that is non-SPLA, that where you're using your own licenses from your shared hosted provider infrastructure. And point number 6 is basically probably the biggest mistake that is related to that. So what sometimes happens is you host something and then also you deploy lots of VMs for the same, you provide not just hosting services, you provide more services, you kind of support the infrastructure for customers, you test stuff for them. When you deploy development tools or any other software in a shared environment, MSDN may not be used there. So the extreme case, now another horror story from my experience, the extreme case is 90% of the VMs in the shared cluster were, hundreds of them by the way, were actually dedicated to development, and the provider didn't count them in the totals that they submitted to Microsoft. So imagine they were only reporting, well, for that cluster, not for the entire estate, but for the cluster, they were only reporting 10% of what they were supposed to be reporting. If they knew about it, if they took care about it, and if they separated their internal development for those customers into their own clusters without giving customers access to those, except for UAT, you can do that. Well, it's a very long topic. Then that problem wouldn't exist. Segregate. This is one of the top mistakes. There are many more. I don't want to waste much of your time. We have already been here for 53 minutes, and what we're going to do now is we're going to. I'll put this slide. Just a bit of a shameless plug here, and we'll go through the questions. So Helmut, thank you. You're very active today as well. Before site visit, ask for planning action plan to prepare for the go. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I usually do that during the kickoff. If I'm with the customer or with the provider, with you, and during the process, that would be a question that I would advise to ask during the kickoff. Or clear action plan from them. And then you take it as a homework. You outline your own action plan, and then you just start insisting. You know what? We're going to go through our timeline. That I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what I suggest. Another one, which is probably not as well, not the question, an advice from Helmut. Ask for report after site visit, needed in case issues appear afterwards. I'm not sure, Helmut, I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you mean here. Ask for report after the site visit. So if you have explanations, please type them in the chat. I'll try and put them on the screen. To have auditors to be responsible for possible errors issues, always ask whether the auditor has collected, retrieved all information required to... well, basically I said that. So yeah, I agree with you. 100%. So let's look at your previous questions, Helmut, as well. How the scope can be negotiated. Well, as I said, you can try and negotiate it, but usually Microsoft just do what they want, because they can. How can you defend starting point when you do not agree with installation dates used default by auditors? Sometimes it's not even an installation date. Sometimes when you don't have the installation date, they just count back to the date when you signed the agreement with your end customer. And sometimes when you cannot provide that information, they would count back to when you opened the data center or even your business. So it's not a good thing, not fun. So how can you defend your starting point? Key, find evidence. So any question like this, find evidence. If they then push back and say, no, we're not going to accept this evidence, then when you call for help, somebody to help you and just say, you know what, dear auditor, this is solid evidence, you must accept it because this is how the contract says, because we are reasonably, what the language of SPLA says, reasonably, what's the word, proving the commencement date for that particular server or a user or a single, or a single instance, anything like that. So what do we need to have prepared as administration to minimize the audit results? I think I probably need a live that will talk just about, I'm planning it, by the way, audit preparation. What you need to have prepared is a list of your customers, a list of all the dates when you commence services, all the change records, all the monthly reports, all the data that you use to calculate your monthly reports. If you have, it's a long list. If you have customers with dedicated service in your infrastructure, accordingly, you need letters from those customers that they're responsible for the licenses that they use in those dedicated hosting environments. License mobility forms. All the necessary addendums signed with your customer according to the language of the contract, SPLA. Those things. Anything that's SPLA. Basically, I'm not telling any secrets right now. All I'm saying is stipulated in SPLA itself, in license mobility partner addendum. So, you know what? Let's just do this because you don't want to just look at that sorry picture of whatever the SPLA agreements asks. Find it. It's all there. It's all there. It actually pains me to think sometimes the risk is in tens of millions only because somebody didn't read the paper, the manual that was helpfully provided by Microsoft, and they even signed under it. How to defend test, demo, trial licenses? SPLA tells that. That's a good question. How to defend the test, demo, trial license to potential customers during audit and existing customers and in the past. Basically, what SPLA says, when you do that, according to the terms of SPLA, make sure you have all the records. This is how you defend it. You have to have records. So in SPLA, you have certain allowances for testing. I don't remember if that's 60 days or 90 days, something maybe 30 days. I don't have to remember that. Each time, as I said, it's a very short contract. When I need to refresh my memory, I just reread it. When you have that allowance, when you can demonstrate something to your end customer or deploy something as a test or have a transition period. So as long as you have records that clearly between you and the end customer stipulate that this is a test period, you're safe. This is how the 5% rule is to be. So Microsoft in their MBSA, they changed this recently for enterprise agreements. They just calculate 5% of the total non-compliance. It used to be per product. And SPLA. The highest bill audit I was involved in, the auditors just said, you know what, we're not going to bother. We're not going to bother calculating per product. They just went with total non-compliance figure, because it was a huge estate, very, very complicated to, but it used to be per product, which is nasty, I think. What if it's just, 5 copies of Visual Studio, of which 1 copy of Visual Studio is not licensed, and the rest for like hundreds of millions per year is completely, compliant? Then you would be punished for just those 4 copies of, or 1 copy of Visual Studio. That's not really fair. I think that's negotiable. Then again, I see that when the estate is big, auditors just count 5% non-compliance across the board. That's it. How to treat other requirements for customers? You know what? It's a very long question. I would take it as a homework and try and maybe do one of my morning videos about license mobilities. License mobility I've covered. So other requirements, simple, you're required. If you're not a license mobility partner, your customers are not allowed at all to bring their licenses. So you're responsible for every single bit. When you become a license mobility partner, you're still responsible for it unless they submit those forms. You can't just sign that addendum to be a licensed mobility partner, get that authorization, and just sleep well and think, oh, fine, I'm safe. No, you're not. You need to get those licensed mobility forms from your end customer. That's it. So unless you have any more questions, I'm going to wrap this up. Could you please share SPLA sample SPLA? There are no sample SPLA agreements. I tried to Google, so all I have is snapshots I took from other customers' SPLA agreements, and I had to obviously when I quit my employment in Derive Logic, I had to delete them. So right now I'm dealing with a couple of SPLA providers, but I can't share those. They're private. Unfortunately, usually you can find something in the United States when there's a government customer. I can't find any. So I'm still trying to Google them and find them. I'm not very friendly with Microsoft these days. You know what? Because sometimes, recently they behave in a very strange way. So I can't go back to Microsoft and ask them to provide it to me. So no, I can't share. I'm sorry. And also the PPT presentation that you presented, yes, I will publish it. I will publish it on the events page first. This is what I do because you click that attend. I don't want to put it on my own page, for those people who didn't bother to attend this event and be here. So this recording will stay on the channel. And I will publish the slides as a PDF on the events page, on this live page on LinkedIn, probably tomorrow. If not today, I'll see. It's 3 o'clock right now. I'm pretty tired, but I'll see if I can do that today. So, well, thank you for being with me today. For surprisingly, I've managed to just spend just 1 hour. And I want to say thank you again. I want to say goodbye. I'm going to play my channel's trailer. I'm asking you, I'm begging you. I'm begging you, please subscribe because I want to get to 1,000 subscribers to be able to deliver more information to the community. Because right now, unless you get to 1,000, YouTube is restricting visibility. YouTube is restricting features. It's not about monetizing. I don't care about those $3-5 a month for monetization. So that's it. And thank you. And safe with knowledge of licensing. And I'm going to put my trailer as a goodbye. Thanks. Bye-bye.